Do you know how many times in our lives God is working, showing himself strong, and we don't know it? We're stuck on a narrative in our heads that God is silent, that he's not doing anything, and he's moving. That's why we have to walk by faith. It's the Cling Life Show with Kim Cash Tate. Welcome to Season 1. It's not too late. Welcome to the Cling Life Show. I am your host, Kim Cash Tate, and this is Season 1, Episode 6, with the theme, It's Not Too Late. We have seen several circumstances in the Word of God where it looked like it was too late from an earthly perspective in terms of God's promise or what God was calling the individual to do. But God showed up and showed that he is God. He is sovereign. He is eternal. And our perspective of time is extremely limited. We have been in the Old and New Testament looking at Lazarus, Abraham and Sarah, the Apostle Paul, Jonah, Zacharias, and Elizabeth. In this episode, we're going to the book of Ruth, but our focus is Naomi. I talked about Naomi in the 2024 Cling Challenge, where the theme was Don't Give Up. Naomi seemed like she had given up because she thought it was too late for her, too late to see God's goodness in her life. I won't be going in depth in the book of Ruth. I have an entire study on the book of Ruth on my YouTube channel, but we'll look at part of the story, and I'm starting at Ruth chapter 1, verse 1. I'm reading from the NASB. Now it came about in the days when the judges governed that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the land of Moab with his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem in Judah. Now they entered the land of Moab and remained there. So these are tough times to begin with. There's a famine in the land. Food is scarce. The family has to uproot and move from Bethlehem, which is in the land of Judah, to a whole nother land, Moab. So they have to move away from the promised land, the land that God had promised to his people that they had settled on, to live among people who had been enemies of Israel. Surely this is not the life they envisioned, but this is what they had to do to survive. And they're in it together. They've got their family. Continuing verse 3, then Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They took for themselves Moabite women as wives. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. And they lived there about 10 years. Then both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and the woman was bereft of her 2 children and her husband. Definitely not the life Naomi envisioned. She's in a foreign land, lost her husband and both of her sons. We can imagine how immense the grief was for her. She's now been in this land for 10 years, and she has to decide what to do. Continuing verse 6, then she arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the land of Moab. For she had heard in the land of Moab that the Lord had visited his people in giving them food. So she departed from the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. And Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, go, return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. May the Lord grant that you may find rest, each in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, no, but we will surely return with you to your people. But Naomi said, return, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they may be your husbands? Return, my daughters, go, for I am too old to have a husband. If I said I have hope, if I should even have a husband tonight and also bear sons, would you therefore wait until they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is harder for me than for you, for the hand of the Lord has gone forth against me. This part where she's saying, have I yet sons in my womb that they may be your husbands? This is in reference to the law which we see in Deuteronomy 25, 5 and 6. When brothers live together and one of them dies and has no son, the wife of the deceased shall not be married outside the family to a strange man. Her husband's brother shall go into her and take her to himself as wife and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. It shall be that the firstborn whom she bears shall assume the name of his dead brother, so that his name will not be blotted out from Israel. We see this played out rather tragically in Genesis 38 with Tamar. Let's look at a little bit of that starting at Genesis 38 verse 6. It says, Now Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was evil in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord took his life. Then Judah said to Onan, Go into your brother's wife and perform your duty as a brother-in-law to her and raise up offspring for your brother. And that's what we saw in Deuteronomy 25. Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. So when he went into his brother's wife, he wasted his seed on the ground in order not to give offspring to his brother. But what he did was displeasing in the sight of the Lord, so he took his life also. Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, Remain a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up. For he thought, I am afraid that he too may die like his brothers. So Tamar went and lived in her father's house. So you get the idea of how it's supposed to work. The point is to raise up offspring for the brother who died. The firstborn takes the name of the deceased brother and preserves his legacy, basically. Judah, the father, tried to abide by this, but he said, I done gave 2 sons to this woman, and look what happened to them both. But it wasn't her fault. Just so happened that both of your sons were evil in the Lord's sight. Judah told her to wait and remain a widow, but he had no intention of giving his 3rd son to Tamar. So after a good amount of time had passed, Judah's wife died, and Tamar said, I'm not waiting for your son anymore. I'm going to have a child by you. I said it was tragic. It's also rather sordid. You can read the rest in Genesis 38. I think we've got the point for our purposes. So now we can better understand Naomi's point. She's saying, I have no other sons, and I'm too old at this point to marry and have more children. She emphasizes her point and says, but even if I could marry tonight and have more sons, would you really wait for them? So she's telling them it's too late for me to help you. Return to your land and to your people where you can get married and have children. But the end of verse 13 tells us the very deep grief that's in her heart. She says, it's harder for me than for you, for the hand of the Lord has gone forth against me. It's one thing to lose your family. We can't imagine losing a husband and 2 sons. But when you think you no longer have God, when you think his hand is against you, that's a whole nother level of grief. Continuing verse 14, and they lifted up their voices and wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. Then she said, Behold, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. But Ruth said, Do not urge me to leave you or turn back from following you, for where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus may the Lord do to me, and worse, if anything but death parts you and me. When she saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to her. So Orpah is gone. She turns back. Ruth clings to Naomi. That should have told her right there that she wasn't alone, that God was still working, that he was still with her. But grief had turned to bitterness and she couldn't see it. Continuing verse 19, so they both went until they came to Bethlehem. And when they had come to Bethlehem, all the city was stirred because of them. And the women said, "Is this Naomi?" She said to them, "Do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has witnessed against me, and the Almighty has afflicted me?" So Naomi returned, and with her Ruth, the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, who returned from the land of Moab. And they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest. Her name, Naomi, means pleasant. She said, "Don't call me that. Call me Mara." She changed her own name, and Mara means bitter. She has drawn a conclusion as to the story of her life, and she has drawn a conclusion as to what God has done. He has dealt very bitterly with me. He has brought me back empty. He's witnessed against me and afflicted me. Can you imagine if that's your assessment of your life? If that's your conclusion for your life? That's all that God has for you? In her mind, that's it. That's her story. It's too late for a different one. But God, he is gracious. He is merciful. He is kind. He is loving. He is faithful. He had a plan for Naomi. That daughter-in-law who would not leave her side was a blessing from God. Look at the timing of their return. They return right at the beginning of barley harvest. God was looking out for them. Ruth tells Naomi, "I'm going to go glean in the fields and get us some food." God, who is sovereign, directs Naomi to the field that belongs to Boaz, who happens to be a relative of Naomi. Come on, Lord, show yourself strong. Do you know how many times in our lives God is working, showing himself strong, and we don't know it? We're stuck on a narrative in our heads that God is silent, that he's not doing anything, and he's moving. That's why we have to walk by faith. Ruth finds favor in Boaz's sight. Of course she does. God is working. He tells her, "You can stay here and glean." He makes sure she's protected. He makes sure she's got plenty of food, her and Naomi. Naomi hears about it and says, "Oh, he's our relative." She gives Ruth a plan so that Boaz, as a relative, can redeem the land as well as Ruth as a wife. I'm giving the overview. If you're not familiar with this story, you can read it for the details. Long story short, Ruth marries Boaz and she has a son. Look at chapter 4, starting at verse 14. Then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed is the Lord who has not left you without a redeemer today. And may his name become famous in Israel. May he also be to you a restorer of life and a sustainer of your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him." Then Naomi took the child and laid him in her lap and became his nurse. The neighbor women gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." So they named him Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. I love that Ruth is the one who gives birth to the son, but the women go straight to Naomi and they say, "Blessed is the Lord." They know what she has been through. They know how she regarded her life, her story, her God. They know because she let everybody know. And they say to her, "Blessed is the Lord." Oh, the realization that he didn't leave you or forsake you. Naomi had said, "I'm too old to have a husband. I won't be having any more sons." They said, "May this boy be to you a restorer of life and a sustainer of your old age." They called him her son. They said, "A son has been born to Naomi, and he is the grandfather of King David." And I love that they said to her, "Your daughter-in-law is better to you than 7 sons." The daughter-in-law who refused to leave her, which was the blessing and the goodness of God. What a beautiful and powerful reminder that God is mindful of us. When we're experiencing grief, and grief comes in all forms, when we're experiencing heartache, challenges, difficulty, it can feel like God is against us. It can feel like this is all that there will be. This is my lot in life. I guess I won't experience anything else. It's too late for all that. This is my story. And the Lord is like, look up. I'm reminded of Hagar when she and Ishmael left the home of Abraham and Sarah, and they wandered in the wilderness. They drank the last of their water, and Hagar set her son down, and she went a ways away because she said, "I don't want to see the boy die." It says she lifted up her voice and wept. But an angel called out to her and said, "Do not fear." And it says in Genesis 21:19 that God opened her eyes and she saw a well of water. And here, all the thoughts Naomi had about her life. Look up, Naomi. Look up. Lift your gaze to your God. The daughter-in-law who you keep trying to send back, he has planted by your side. She is your blessing. If you're in a circumstance that you could have never imagined, never envisioned, look up. That's not all there is. God is above the circumstance and he loves you. He's full of grace and mercy, and he is faithful and good. As they said to Naomi, I say to you, may he be a restorer of life and a sustainer. I pray he lets you know in a powerful way there's so much more to your story. It's not too late. Thanks so much for joining me on the Cling Life Show. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and a positive review would be a blessing. I will see you in the next one. Meanwhile, keep clinging.